the MLS photo, and Jared, you can comment on this anytime. I am for the use of the MLS photo, right? And the reason I'm for the use of the MLS photo is that was the way the house looked at the time to when it was sold. And it's one of those things to where it's like, it's your best representation because it's your,
and it's a high quality photo, right? It's public record, okay? And also too, you know, and I'm with you. And by the way, I just want to make clear, this doesn't mean, because our order requirements are that you have to take original comp photos. Let me be clear. You need to take original comp photos. That's an investor requirement. Unfortunately, Brian and I are not the investors who drive the market. So we don't make these rules. But if we did, we would be in agreement on this, because not only is it a better representation of what the property was like at the moment it was sold, this is an issue of appraiser safety. I've had conversations with multiple appraisers where they're shooting a comp photo and they get pulled over by the police, okay, and they've got to talk their way out of an arrest, okay, or they get a neighbor chasing after them, okay, or right, that happens a lot to appraisers. So I'm with you. If I were able to change something in this, then I would agree. I would say MLS photos would be absolutely acceptable for any comp.
So Jared, what do you think of that?
Oh, I agree. I agree 100%. I often, I've looked at the photo that I am driving the house and it's got a brand new roof on it now, but the MLS photo shows the roof, having 2 or 3 years left. And then I get the comment, well, why didn't you make an adjustment for a new roof? Well, because it wasn't new. Or why did you make a negative adjustment? Or there's a brand new fence up around the yard, or an RV parking pad, or new doors and windows and paint and all that kind of stuff, because you're there 3 months later. And so definitely it's a representation.
I mean, even sometimes 6 months later, right? Even sometimes yeah. I mean, and this sounds like this is a little more granular and practical, but it's one of those things to where it's like, okay, like realistically speaking, if you're doing an appraiser, I mean, everyone understands that they have to do the best job they can. But realistically speaking, if you go out and you look at 10 comparables and and then all of a sudden you're getting to write up a report and there's one that you miss, and you got to go all the way back out there to take another photo. That's just not practical.
Especially if you're in a rural area.
In a rural area, it's just not practical, and it ends up creating either it creates a dilemma. Do I drive 45 minutes an hour to go take the comp photo, or I didn't see it the first time? Do I not see it the second time? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's unpractical at some level to drive all the way back.
And from a management standpoint, you guys on the management side, the delay that then comes to your client.
Yeah.
They want to get the best comparable in. You've seen 17 photos of that house on the MLS that the agent took. They got a little video about it on a tour. It's got a YouTube or a Facebook video as well. And what's really the necessity? You're holding up now. It's going to take me an extra 12 hours to get the report back to you, or 24 hours. And I want to give you the best report, so I don't want to exclude that one or not use it. And that's the other option is, okay, I turned it in on time. Practically, it's a practical choice. It's a choice. What do I do?
Well, sometimes it doesn't affect it doesn't necessarily affect the credibility by necessarily excluding it. But I always thought, like, sometimes you would have liked to. You know what I mean? Because it's just an extra. It's just here's a ace in the hole now that helps solidify the relationship. Or solidify the.
I just have to put this out there again, disclaimer, and I just have to be clear on this. Again, we're discussing the appraisal process. We're discussing a lot of things here. However, again, because what I don't want to have happen, because it's going to happen, is I'm going to have an appraiser come back to me when they have a revision that says you have to get an original comp photo. They're going to come back to me and they're going to send me this link, and they're going to say, "You said live on TV that I didn't have to do it."
There you go.
No. Let me be clear. It's still part of my scope of work that I want the original comp photos. I am in agreement. We're all in agreement. That's really not the most effective way to do it. However, again, that's the investor requirement. So that is the requirement. So I just need to make clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And Jared, let's talk a little bit about the trainee process, right? So you've trained some appraisers, right? You said
right.
Yeah. And now I guess and you're a USPAP instructor, so you obviously know a lot about this process. They've recently are trying to reduce some of the training requirements, removing some of the college education requirements, removing some of the licensing or continuing education, and just kind of lightening it up a little bit. Do you think it's something that's necessary? I mean, do you think, because historically the need for a degree, it's like, becoming an appraiser is almost like getting an MBA at some level, right?
Right.
And, when in all reality, being trained as an appraiser and being a good, competent appraiser has nothing to do with necessarily having a degree, because measuring degrees and measuring the intelligence, right? If you pass the test, you pass the test, right?
Right.
I've trained both those, back in the day when they didn't have to have a degree, and those that did have a degree. The only part that I think that the degree helps with is, well, there might be a couple of things, and somebody might argue differently, but in the writing or putting onto paper what you're thinking about the home or the subject property or the comparables of the market, it seems to be that those that have had to do that in a classroom setting have been challenged. That might come more naturally or easier for them, but honestly, that probably in the report writing side is the only thing. But there's certainly those that can write very well that have never gone to college, and to me, it's the more important side is the experience side. When I had somebody come and train, the very first thing that I had them do was look at comparables and help clean the data or verify the data. They didn't select the comparable. And then the next thing, I wanted them doing the cost approach.
Yeah.
And the reason was the cost approach, they had to figure out what the components of the property were worth, the value of those individual components, and that got them very, very well rooted in a foundation of cost versus value. And that was just my process. Others do it other ways. And it wasn't until they had a little bit more experience that I said, okay, let me see which comparables you would use for this home that we just walked or that we just inspected. And it was always much faster training them that way because they got that foundation. And I think that experience foundation in the industry. I've trained somebody that never had bought a home before. Oh my gosh, that was the longest training ever. They were young, they were excited about the business and the industry, but they had never been to the closing table.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to understand even why the report was being asked for, where it was going to be used later, they couldn't connect that. Those that just have experience in real estate, I think is much more important than a 4-year degree or an associate degree, or you can certainly get experience that way, but it's better in our industry, I think, boots on the ground.
Let's talk a little bit about cost approach, sales comparison approach, income approach, right? So Fannie, traditionally, historically, you've all three approaches, right, were used.
Right.
And then over time, it's basically been sales comparison approach, right?
Yep.
But
and the USPAP still requires you to consider all approaches and reconcile all approaches, no matter what the client wants, the Fannies and the Freddies. So you still have to go through that process of saying which approach is best, or is the appropriate approach and lends to a credible result. And it's the appraiser's responsibility, not the client's responsibility, to dictate that. I'm a big fan of the cost approach. In my market, though, it's very relevant. If I was on the East Coast and homes are 200 or 300 years old or 250 years old, I don't know. I might think completely different about it. But in my market that I work in, 120 20-year-old home is rare.
Yeah, that's not.
Yeah, and, you know, it's funny because personal opinion, I think a lot of the crisis could have been avoided if, you know, back 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, if all three approaches were used, because it would have, you know, when you're doing all three, right, there's a level of practicality.
Right.
Right. So this house is listed and sold for $550,000. So you've got 5 comps that sold for $550,000. But then you could build it for $350,000.
Right.
And from an income approach perspective, just the general market capitalization rate in the area would determine it's, like, let's say it's worth